I'm Ulrike Eder, Chief Marketing Officer at esynergy, and this is the esynergy podcast. Welcome. In each episode, we invite business and technology leaders to hear their unfiltered story, the lessons learned behind success and failure, and real practical takeaways of how to turn big ideas into value. This is my inaugural first podcast, and I could not be more excited to have the one and only Simon Wardley as my first guest. Simon, a strategist, a researcher, founder of Wardley Maps, where we turn business strategy and make sense of it. From a background in mathematics and genetics, to being twice voted one of the UK's most influential technology leaders, Simon has built an incredible global community around mapping and situational awareness. Now, I guess we both agree we live in a time of incredible disruption, not just politically and economically. We have new technologies entering the market on the daily. We have ever-shifting customer expectations, and as business leaders, as leaders in general, it's getting even more and more difficult to make good decisions that last. And Simon, you have talked about multiple times around how sometimes organizations are fighting without maps, almost like in a battle-like situation. And I guess my first question to you is, why do you think as leaders we struggle so much to see the landscape, to see the maps ahead of making these incredibly important decisions?
Gosh, what a question. So why do people not see the landscape before they make a choice? I suppose if we look at navigational history, Vikings used to use epic stories as a mechanism of travel before somebody came up with a map. So there was always a time pre-maps. Now, when we look at businesses today, a lot of us, we run on stories and narrative. We tell each other that great leaders are great storytellers, which is fair enough. And we have lots of things called maps. Things like business process maps, mind maps, systems maps, all those sorts of things. But they've all got one thing in common. None of them are maps. They're all graphs. And so the problem is it's not that people don't understand that understanding your landscape, situational awareness matters. There hasn't been a mechanism for actually mapping the landscape. We've had lots of graphs instead. So when I started this whole journey, I very much, I sort of assumed that other people knew how to do this. And this is what you learned at MBA schools, because I'd never done an MBA or anything like that. And so I developed a cheap and cheerful way of doing it for the rest of us. And it just pure happenstance that it turned out that others didn't know how to map. So I don't think it's not a case of people not knowing it's important. It's a case of just literally not knowing how to do it.
When did you first start mapping?
Okay, so I was running a company. This is back in 2005. And I had no idea what I was doing. We were being very successful, but I had absolutely no idea. Just making things up as I went along. I used to read every book I could find on strategy. It wasn't helping me at all. And I was always worried that people would eventually rumble that I had no idea. I was like the fake CEO, I used to call myself. And out of just pure luck, I ended up in a bookshop in Charing Cross. And I was talking to the bookseller, and I said, we were talking about strategy books. And she asked me, had I ever read Sun Tzu's The Art of War? And I hadn't. And she was a very, very good bookseller. So she persuaded me to buy 2 different versions of the book, which I'm so grateful for. Really grateful. Because it was in the reading of the second version, I noticed a pattern. So Sun Tzu talked about 5 factors that mattered in competition. 1, have a purpose, a moral imperative. 2, understand the landscape. 3, understand the heavens or the climactic patterns, how the landscape is changing. Then you understand principles, and how you orientate yourself around stuff. And then finally you get into the gameplay, the leadership bit. And it was the landscape bit which struck me. And that drove me into looking at military history and how we learnt strategy and learnt from previous battles using maps. And that made me think, right, I need to use maps. So that's where I started on my journey. It was purely fortuitous. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing, and it's all down to a bookseller.
Amazing. How many maps do you think you've done since then?
A lot. What a question.
I tried to find out. I could not find that anywhere.
So I'm terrible. I map everything. I mean, I started off because I became really enthusiastic about this idea of mapping an environment. It took me ages, literally about a year, to work out actually how to map an economic and technology space. It wasn't like something obvious. And I use that for not just economic and technological spaces, but also political, social, and legal. I mean, we compete over many different landscapes. The environmental territorial is one, and then you've got the others. And we're good at landscapes and the territorial, not so good on the others. So I use them everywhere. I mean, I even map books I read. So I keep a record of the books I've got. So how many have I done? Oh, I don't know. Thousands.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Incredible.
thousands.
And do you think out of these thousands, was there a map that you're happy to talk about where it really went wrong? And I suspect you're going to tell me there is no wrong outcome.
No. I mean, first of all, there's no right outcome because all maps are imperfect representations of a space. So if you think of somewhere like... if I make a map of Paris, so I'm in the territorial space, it's never going to be a perfect map of Paris unless it's 1-to-1 scale, which means it's the size of Paris. And as a map, that's pretty useless. So all maps are imperfect representations. So that's the first thing. So if you're going to ask me which ones have been wrong, they're all wrong.
Right.
But that's not what matters. What matters is whether they're useful for us understanding a space and communicating with each other. So I suppose one of my favorite maps, which was very, very wrong, but led to a lesson, was actually in the education group. So I run these research groups for different industries. And so I had about 50 people in the education research group, and they were like professors of education and teachers, so right across the spectrum. And we mapped out education, and the maps never made any sense at all. And we had the students at the top of the map, and the whole perspective was about the student needs. And none of the maps made sense until somebody in the group said, what if we turn it the other way round? And so we put government and the educational establishments at the top of the map and students as an input right at the very bottom. And then it all made sense. And there was this horrible moment where we realized the entire educational establishment seems to be focused on producing useful economic units rather than, enlightening people, which was terrible. We had all these teachers and professors, and they were like, no, this can't be true. But, it was one of those moments. So yeah, that's like a story of something going terribly wrong leads to something interesting.
Which I guess then whether or not the map is wrong or right, there's always so much learning in this, right? Because
the only maps, all maps are wrong. Just start with that principle. It's a question of whether it's useful.
Yeah.
And if it's not useful, stop doing it.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. Have I come across useless maps? Oh, sure, I've written several, but I won't admit to it.
Of course not. Next episode. I have to go there. AI.
Oh, gosh, yes.
And I promise it's only one question about AI. If you were to map the evolution of AI,
right,
where are we right now?
Okay. All right. Well, you've also used the word evolution there, so we better unpack a little bit what a map is. So in order to map a technological economic space, we need to take an even further step back. I better explain the difference between a graph and a map. Mm-hmm. So the difference between a graph and a map is in a map, space has meaning. So if you take a map of the world and move something like Australia and put it next to England, that changes the meaning of the map. So the space itself has meaning. Now with a graph, what you've got is boxes and connections between boxes, relationships. And so if you move things, it doesn't change the meaning as long as you keep the connections the same. So that's the fundamental difference between a graph and a map. And maps are very good for understanding landscapes because that space has meaning. Right. Now, in order to create a map, you need some basic things. You need an anchor, such as magnetic north, and you need position of pieces, north, south, east, or west of this, and you need consistency of movement. So if I'm going north, I'm going north. If I'm going south, I'm going south. So how do you do that in an economic and technological space? Well, I started off by thinking about what's the anchor. We'll start with users. That could be the business, that could be consumers, that could be the regulators. And that's going to be what we're going to focus on. That's the anchor, the sort of magnetic north. And then you go, well, where do we go from there? Well, they all have needs. So we talk about what their needs are, and all of their needs have other needs. And those needs have other needs. So what you do is you create a chain of needs. And in a business, within a business, we call that a value chain. And across businesses, we call it a supply chain. Now, once you've got that, that gives you what's called anchor and position. That's still a graph. You now want to get it into a map. And the way to do that is to go through every single component and ask one question: how evolved is this? So every single component evolves from a state of genesis, the novel and new, like the first time we saw a radio, custom-built examples like build your own crystal radio set, then you get into products and feature differentiation, and finally commodity, utility services. And so if you simply do that, you create a map. Literally anchor, value chain, evolution, done. So if we look at the AI field, there are many, many different components in that field. Now, what's interesting about components is when they tend to shift from product to utility, so they industrialize, they create new practices, they have big impacts on society, rapid development of new things. So like compute goes from product to utility with cloud, new practices, DevOps, new things like Netflix. And we are getting that in the world of AI with large language models. So they are shifting from that product space to more utility. We're seeing an explosion of new practices, things like vibe coding or chops or whatever you wish to call it. I mean, we used to call it conversational programming. And then you get an explosion of higher order systems as well. So when you look at the AI field, it is a field. Some of the components are industrializing, like large language models, and that's having quite a big impact in terms of new practices and also new things being built.
And do you have any predictions of what might be next?
Oh, gosh. Well, after the AI field. So I did a lot of work on agents, and this was back in about 15 years ago. About 10 years ago, but 15 years ago, I was mapping this stuff as well. And a particular area which took my interest was something which I called spime script. So just to explain, whenever we build something, we often have a physical and a digital element to that thing. So, it might be a watch and it might be the software running on the watch. And the physical side can be described in a CAD diagram, a digital diagram. Of course, the software is again just symbolic instructions. So there's an interaction to create the function of something. So why don't we just describe the function of something and let a compiler decide what should be physical, what should be digital? And so this was the idea of spime script. I called it that because of a book called Making Things by Bruce Sterling. And because back in the 1990s, I was doing an awful lot of work in 3D printing. And then Seringhouse and others did printed electronics, 2001, 2002. So for me, that's the big thing after the AI space. The big wave, I think, is coming along. And I think we call it cyber-physical these days, as in the combination of physical and digital. I think we call it that. So that's the wave after this one, I suspect.
When do you think that'll hit us?
Oh gosh, you ask. These are all forward prediction questions.
Stop.
No. So I did a whole bunch of work on cycles, and I came up with something called the Peace, War, and Wonder cycle, and I built a whole bunch of weak signals for detecting this stuff. And when this stuff appears, it normally takes somewhere in the region of 10 to 15 years. It takes a long time for it to become on the point of becoming a utility and becoming industrialized, and then 10 to 15 years to spread. And then that kicks off a whole bunch of new things built on top, which create new waves, etc. And there's a wonderful piece of work, book by Carlota Perez, all about financial capital and cycles within it as well, and technology. And so she does this great job of looking at these different waves, and they all sort of have an origin back in what are known as Kondraty waves. So this is me sort of, I think this particular cycle we're in the moment is probably going to take another 10 years to become seen as a sort of new norm. At least we've got a lot of practices we still have to develop. And then that will take another 20 to 30 years for it to really spread to the laggards and everybody else. And so I imagine the spine script, if it does appear, I would hope it will be in the next 15 years or thereabouts.
It's interesting because there's so many varying guesstimates, I guess, in terms of the evolution that we're partaking right now from an AI perspective. And it goes literally from sub a year to what you just described, where we're saying, it will be in the decades.
So are we talking, when you say sub 1 year, this reminds me of the various predictions that we won't need software engineers within a year and all those sorts of things. Okay. So one of the interesting things about the shift with cloud, so this was compute going from product to utility. If I go all the way back to 2006, 7, 8, 9, around that time, we saw the shift obviously going on. We saw development of new practices. Andy and Patrick, who came up with the term DevOps, that was 2009, 2010, coalesced those practices by just giving it a name. Those practices were going on. But what was interesting was we used to get a lot of CIOs running around saying we're going to get rid of our sysadmins. We won't need them anymore. And I used to have to point out something called Jevons paradox. So Jevons paradox, William Stanley Jevons wrote this book called The Coal Question. Because what happened is they made steam engines more efficient. And so everybody thought, we're going to use less coal. And what happened is the amount of coal we used exploded. And the reason for it, and people often say it's price elasticity, but the real reason is by making these things cheaper, they enabled new industries to appear. And so what happened with the cloud space is by turning it into a utility, they enabled all sorts of new industries, things like Netflix and all the rest of it as well. And of course, you're in competition with others, and some people didn't save money, they just did more stuff, and you've got to keep up. So we went from having your average large enterprise had 2,000 physical servers to having 50,000 virtual servers, and you've got to manage that. And so what they'd done is they'd fired a whole bunch of sysadmins, and now they had even more complex environments. And so they had to hire them back again, but they hired them back as DevOps engineers. So I suspect what's going to happen is we're going to fire a whole bunch of software engineers and then hire them back as AI wranglers or agentic herders or, machine psychology. We'll just hire them back under a different title because it will be a different set of practices. There you are. That's my prediction for the future.
So we're all safe, as per Simon Wardley.
No, it's the death of the software engineer and the rise of the agentic herder, which is basically software engineer with a few extra practices.
Yes. And going back to kind of the opener around uncertain times and uncertain environments and how making good decisions is becoming increasingly difficult. Do you see any kind of common mistakes that leaders make when trying to do the right thing in such uncertain times?
So one of my, Salomon's story came up with something known as the innovation paradox. So an organization has to do two things at the same time. You have to be very rigorous and, efficient in order to compete effectively with others. And you'll also have to be highly innovative, which requires a complete replacement of the values that you need to be efficient. Mm-hmm. So you have to do these polar opposite things. So organizations are forever struggling with this. And you'll often get people say, we've got to be innovative because it's getting tough. And so they want to innovate. And innovation is a dreadful, dreadful word. Well, I love it, but it's also dreadful. And the reason why it's dreadful is every time we create something novel and new, the genesis of something, we call it an innovation. Every custom-built example of something is an innovation. Every feature differentiation on a product is an innovation. And every shift of a product to a utility business model is also an innovation. So they're all called innovations, but they're all completely different things, require completely different practices. And of course, if you can't see the environment, it's really difficult to work this out. The other thing we forget is you can't deal with innovation unless you also deal with your own inertia if you've got a pre-existing business. So one of my favorite examples of this is Blockbuster, Netflix. So Blockbuster, Netflix. Well, I'll ask you the question if you don't. I'll turn it around.
I was around when there was Blockbuster.
Right, super. Who was first with the website? Do you know?
Blockbuster.
Good. Who was first with video ordering online?
They were. Blockbuster.
Yeah. And who was first with video streaming experiments?
I don't know that, but I'm assuming it's the hat trick of Blockbuster.
It is. And who went bankrupt first?
Yeah,
Blockbuster.
It definitely was
So
Blockbuster.
the problem is Blockbuster had inertia created by a highly successful business model, which was late fees. So you remember you took the cassette back and that's where they made most of their money. Now, Netflix was a DVD mail order company. So they didn't have that problem at all. So you used to get DVDs from Netflix, and when you wanted a new one, you'd send that one back, and then they'd send you the new one. So that's how it operated. So they had no problems at all with the ideas of streaming. But of course, streaming was a real problem for Blockbuster because it affected their business model. So, whenever, you go on one of these sort of, we've got to innovate, you've got to be really clear in terms of, what type of innovation are we talking about? Because the practices and methods you need are very, very different. You've also got to be really clear on what inertia we have as well, because that will often stop you. So that's a common pattern, common mistake that I see, people not knowing what sort of innovation and not tackling the inertia.
Yeah. And I guess with the example of Blockbuster and Netflix, for me, it's always the thinking that they weren't quick enough. It was very evident where the market demand, where the customer demand was going, and Netflix was just quicker and better to convert that. But surely
that's a bit unfair on Blockbuster because Blockbuster literally out-innovated everybody. They were coming up with wonderful ideas, but the thing is, at the heart, they had this. Yeah. They didn't deal with this inertia.
Wasn't able to. Yeah,
and and it was a bit like Kodak had the same all around the printing business. It created, so the Kodak was like the first, if not the first, with digital still cameras and online photo services. But it also made a lot of money from ink, as in the printing business. And there was a real conflict between the digital world, which didn't have photographs, and their photographic business. And you see this time and time again.
Very connected to my next question. So, Simon, you and I talk a lot about value at esynergy. Oh. I know.
Yes, we do.
And I guess, how can organizations avoid the pressures of chasing the next, I call it shiny new technology, versus really thinking about where is the business and customer impact? Because we see a lot of that. A lot of technology spend going in that direction.
Okay. So imagine if you had generals who didn't have any territorial map. and they're trying to decide how to fight in some sort of battle. Well, without any understanding of the landscape at all, they might think, well, we've got to, I don't know, protect trees or bomb hills or whatever it happens to be. I mean, they might get surveys and hear that 57% of other generals are bombing hills. So they might say, oh, we better bomb a hill. It's really difficult to know what you need to do if you can't see the environment. And if you're trapped in a world of narrative, and a narrative is normally reinforced by people doing surveys and everything else, it's easy to get suckered into the sort of, we better have this new technology, rather than thinking about what is our landscape? What are the components there? Where is the value actually within that landscape? What should we be focused on? So I often tease in terms of large language models. I use them all the time, mostly for helping me to build tools. I almost never for getting answers, because I actually think they're very weak at that. But when it comes to using those in a business, I mean, you don't start by we've got to put it somewhere. Well, you might do if you're trying to encourage VCs or whatever. You normally start by, let's understand our business. Let's understand our landscape. Where can this help us? And I think that's the problem people have. And I think that shows up in the wider question of value, because everybody likes to talk about value. But a lot of organizations struggle with things that they do to identify where the value is actually being generated. And I get this because I get people turning up and they tell me they've spent 400 million on a data center and they've now got to show the return on investment. And it's just like, surely that was done before you. And often they do things because somebody senior thinks this is an important thing to do. Then somebody else works out how much it's going to cost, and somebody works out what the return on investment needs to be, and then somebody goes and gets some marketing data to justify it, whether it's real or not. And then, of course, once they've done it, it can become a quick political football. Somebody else, oh, you wasted money there. And now they start desperately looking for where the real value is. And it's often post-event.
Do we just all rush too quickly into decisions?
Do we leap before we look? Do
we? I love a good leap. I'm not going to lie.
I fail fast. Yes, but that shouldn't mean just jump without actually, looking at the environment. It doesn't take long to look at the environment once you get into the practice of doing so. So do we? Yeah, we do a bit.
So really understanding the landscape beforehand, thinking about the value beforehand.
Well, I mean, it can be time-consuming. I mean, I'm doing one on space at the moment with a whole bunch of people from various space organizations around the world. And we've spent 10 whole hours mapping out the space industry. And we're probably going to spend another 10, so maybe 20 hours in total. And for some people, 20 hours to map out, to really understand a landscape and an industry might be too long, because they need to make a decision now. Well, in which case you can just do a cheerful map and just do it in 10, 15 minutes. But I would still have a tendency of just going, before we do something, what are the users? What are the components involved? How evolved are they? At least, in an hour, you can create a map. And if it's something we have to react so fast that we can't spend an hour, well, sure, fine. Just jump.
Yeah. And I think you've just given us the components. My next question was going to be, if I want to start mapping tomorrow.
Yes.
Where do I start?
Oh, the hard one, right. Where do you start? You start by starting. So mostly what people's journey into mapping is something along these lines. They hear of mapping, they think, oh, we should do that. I must do that. And then I get sidetracked by something else. And then something will happen and somebody will go, and I've seen this in loads of organizations, if only we'd mapped this before, we wouldn't have made that mistake. And then people go, right, we should map. And then they get sidetracked by something else. And that normally goes on for about 9 years until it gets to the point that people really start going, okay, we're going to learn to map. So I normally say it takes about 9 years to learn to map, which is 9 years telling yourself, I'm going to map, and then a couple of weeks actually learning how to do it. It's a bit like with me playing my electric guitar. I mean, it's been there for about 10 years, and I will pick it up at some point. So the process is really simple. You just think about who are the users, what are the components involved, how evolved are those components, and then you share it with others, and you let them challenge the map. Because what you find is the information that you need to understand a landscape is usually in the minds of several people, not in one person. And so it just becomes a communication tool. And how I say a couple of weeks, look, I take people who are total novices to mapping in an industry in these research groups, and they're all capable of mapping by the end of 10 hours, so it doesn't take long.
And I mean, from first-hand experience, you have come into our executive team meetings, and we have mapped certain problems within 2 hours. And yes, it might not be a complete map, but there was so much more insight just by the questions you have asked us that we would usually not apply in kind of common problem-solving environments. So I guess there's also, you can chop off some of the complete map and still find a lot of value in it.
So one of the areas I love doing is actually more in conflict resolution. So one of the problems with stories is we tell everybody that, great leaders are great storytellers. So when you challenge somebody's story, you're actually challenging them. You're saying, if you disagree with a story, you're saying, I don't think you're right. I don't think you're a great leader. You don't know you're saying that, but that's what you're in effect doing. And people get very defensive. Now, the beauty about getting the story on a map is I can go, the map is wrong without challenging the person. And so I like, an example of this, I wanted to map the concept of culture. And in order to do so, I got two opposing groups together in a room. It was in the UK, and they were Brexiteers and Remainers. And these people...
Did you record this?
I didn't record that. I should have done. It was so funny. I mean, because I'd asked the Remainers, would you like a cup of coffee or tea? And they would go coffee. And then the Brexiteers, well, we're not having coffee, we'll have tea. And then it was like, these people wouldn't agree on anything, but they were able to create a map of culture they're not disagreeing with each other, they're disagreeing with the map. And so I find it a great way of getting conflict resolution down and solving those sorts of problems.
Amazing. Is there anything that lends itself more and less to mapping? Are there any things that are great? Like you just mentioned so many different examples around, you can map culture, you can, are there any things that are better and worse for mapping?
Right. Well, I look at it like there's the political, economic, social, technology, and legal landscapes, and then there's the environment, and we call that PESTLE. And the environmental, which is the territorial, we're really good at that. Okay, we've got radars, we've got situation rooms, we've got great maps. We're fantastic in that space. Military does a great job. I think the others, not so hot. I mean, we don't really have maps, and at best we might have graphs. I mean, you see this within the economic space. I mean, we get shocks like COVID, Brexit itself, the Ukraine war, and impacts supply chains. And do we really understand where it's impacting? Well, some nations are really good at this stuff, like China, for example, is very, very good in the economic, social, technological. They're very good at identifying and targeting things. And you can see that over a 30-year period just by looking at import-export ratios between various countries. But the rest of us, maybe not so. So all of those spaces, I think, because I've used maps in all of those spaces, it's pretty good at.
Nice.
Outside of those spaces, well, what governs those spaces is the ones I use maps in, is they are forms of spaces of competition. So competition, the idea of competition is competitor means groups seeking something and resources together. And there's different ways of doing it. We can fight each other, conflict, cooperate with each other, or help each other, cooperation, or work together, collaboration. So you get three basic forms of competition. And my maps really only work in competitive spaces. If you're talking about non-competitive spaces, I don't know how to do that.
And I guess it's fascinating. I've been in mapping sessions with you, and all you really do, sorry, exclamation marks, you ask a lot of questions.
Yes.
And you talked about culture as well. Is there one single most powerful question a leader can ask their teams?
Oh, gosh, that's such a broad and, God, impossible. There's so much we can talk. Well, we said it earlier. Right now, if there's one question I would be asking, actually, I've said it to Patrick as well, where's the value? And the reason for that is one of the things I like about maps is it forces you to think about the users, their needs, the components, and helps you try to think about where the value is going to be. And we used to in government, we used to go around with phones with on the back, what's the user need? As a way of reinforcing this idea, think about the users and their needs. I think we need to go a step further and basically have, where's the value? Get people really thinking about that. Because once they start thinking about value, then it becomes really interesting because immediately everybody goes, oh, financial value. But there are other forms of value, social value, political value as well. So it opens up these sorts of discussions as well. So the question I would be asking is always, where's the value in what we're doing?
Yeah. And I guess it goes back to what you said earlier around sometimes it makes a lot of sense, but we don't do it because we just rush into decisions and we rush into the next steps without really stopping and thinking about, does that make sense? Does that add value to our customers, to our business, to society?
Yes, I think we do. I mean, we love to talk about value. Loads of people really do love to talk about value. Very few measure and can actually describe the value. I think that's quite noticeable. And yes, I think we do really sometimes rush in without thinking about the space. Agreed.
Right. I have a little quick fire round for you.
Oh gosh, go for it.
Favorite technology prediction you got right?
Oh, okay, but the ones I get right are usually the dystopian ones I really don't like and I want to be wrong on. So I'll go forward. I won't do a past one. I'll do a forward. I'll give a prediction, and my prediction is the one earlier, that a whole bunch of people who are claiming we won't need software engineers, well, they will be right because we'll just rename them to something else, but we will still need software engineers plus a few more practices.
Excellent. Biggest buzzword you would banish?
Sovereignty today. So sovereignty is a very, very, very real thing, and it's incredibly important. But when we talk about sovereignty in territorial spaces, we use a map to say, here's our border, here's our culture, here's our values. If you cross, we conflict with you, we collaborate, cooperate outside. Great. But we have all these conversations of sovereignty in these other spaces without any maps of the landscape. So it's a bit like generals saying, protect the trees. Which trees? So I would like to see that word banned from discussion in any digital arena at all until people start producing the maps, and then we can have sensible discussions.
One book every technology or digital leader should read.
Oh, there's so many. Carlos Perez, Financial Capital Cycles. Oh, God, so many. E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops. Right. So it's about 110 years old. It's a wonderful book, and it's all about a society and world controlled and governed by machines. It's an amazing book. and something goes wrong. So Ian Forster's The Machine Stops.
What's giving you hope in technology right now?
Oh, China. That's an unusual answer, isn't it?
You'll get a lot of love for this.
Oh no, we burn him. But so one of the things that's interesting about the large language model space is what's happening is our tool sets are changing. So we're going from sort of very structured tools to things like co-pilots. Our languages are changing, so it's going from deterministic to non-deterministic conversational style, and the medium is changing. So we're going from code as text to coding as images as well. So often you'll use a seed image to create other images. So in fact, that seed image is a symbolic instruction. And what's interesting about that is that it's a little bit technical, but tools, language, and medium control how we reason about things. So if you think about, if I controlled the tool, the printing press, the medium paper, and the language, the written word, I would literally control, everything you read and therefore how you reason. So this was, I did a piece of work with the DVLA in 2015. So this was 10 years ago. We mapped out the automotive industry, rolled it forward to 2025, so to now. And there was various things we identified as danger areas in terms of route management and digital subscriptions. But one of the big areas we talked about was the values being embedded in these future intelligent agents through the simulation systems, or what you would call training data today. And so this was 10 years ago. And that was the border which we needed to protect in conflict with others. So the thing that worries me most is we're handing over future sovereignty to basically these companies in Silicon Valley. And by that, I mean we are handing over our ability to reason on the promise of, immediate sort of hopeful growth, which is terrifying. And the reason why I like China is they are going full on down the open source route. They realize how dangerous this stuff is. They're already pushing down the open models. They've done all this interesting stuff in that space, and they're gearing up for what looks like open training data as well. So that gives me hope for the future. And so it's China. And then after that, France, because they're doing the same as well. Some of it. UK less so. Sorry, I'm going to be absolutely hated for this.
We're almost at the end of our episode. I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
This is secondhand information, but I heard that you like a good game of werewolf.
Gosh, I do.
I wanted to pick this up.
Yeah.
And see what you think about my narrative. Should leaders maybe treat strategy and business strategy a bit like a game of werewolf, where maybe we need to pretend less that we know everything and maybe pay a little bit more attention to all the different signals that we have in the room?
Totally. And in fact, I'm going to take that and run with it a little bit more because Fernando Flores, who used to be the Chilean minister, runs used to run a whole bunch of executive training courses in an online video game called World of Warcraft. And these are amazing places to actually gain experience of managing others, situational awareness, understanding spaces. You see a lot in these massive multiplayer online role-playing games, EVE Online. People set up little corporations, and they're almost like simulation systems for learning these skills of how to enthuse others, how to manage a crisis. I don't think we do enough of that. So I totally encourage you in terms of encouraging people to use Werewolf, because I absolutely love the game. But there are some really amazing work that's going on in online video games.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Simon.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining me today. You'll be able to listen to this episode on all your loved podcast mediums and channels. And hopefully we'll see you again soon.